There's a sound that stops time, a call that cuts through silence like a blade through fog. You've heard it, somewhere between sleep and waking, somewhere between the world you know and the one you fear to enter. A black wing against a pale sky, feathers darker than night itself, eyes that hold no mercy, no warmth, only knowledge. The raven. Every culture that ever looked up and saw it knew, this creature does not belong entirely to our world. It moves between realms we cannot see, carries messages we dare not speak aloud, feeds on what we leave behind when we fall. For thousands of years, across every continent through empires risen and collapsed, the raven has watched, waiting, remembering. Tonight we stop running from that shadow. Tonight we follow the raven into the dark, not to fear it but to finally understand what it has been trying to tell us all along. This is the story of death that births life, of prophecy that shatters minds, of chaos that creates worlds, of the shadow within us that we spend our lives denying, until we can't anymore. The raven is calling, and this time, we answer. If you want to enter the threshold between myth and truth, subscribe. This is Beyond Mythology. In the beginning there was no light, no sun, no stars, only the vast formless dark, and within it, a stirring. The Norse knew this truth. Before knowledge could exist, something had to carry it. Before wisdom could be grasped, something had to fetch it from the void. Odin sent 2 ravens into the 9 worlds each dawn, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. Not mere birds, but extensions of consciousness itself, flying through realms mortal eyes could never perceive, returning with secrets plucked from the invisible. Odin feared they might one day choose not to return, and even the All-Father knew what flies into darkness isn't guaranteed to emerge unchanged. Across the ocean, in the mist-wrapped forests of the Pacific Northwest, a different raven story was born. This raven wasn't a servant. He was a thief. The world was trapped in darkness. The sun, moon, and stars were locked in a box, hoarded by a chief who refused to share light with anyone. The raven transformed himself, tricked his way inside, and stole the sun itself. Not for noble reasons, because stagnation is death, because creation demands disruption, because light belongs to no one. It must be seized, released, set free. The raven broke the cosmic egg, and from that shattering, our world was born. In Celtic lands, the Morrigan and her sisters descended upon battlefields as corvids, deciding who would rise and who would fall. Warriors searched the sky before combat, knowing the raven's choice was final. The pattern emerges, whether in Scandinavia, the Pacific Northwest, or ancient Ireland, the raven stands at the threshold between what is and what could be, between order and chaos, between the gods and us. The raven doesn't just observe creation, it participates, it transforms. The ancient Greeks had a word, psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who walks between life and death. But the raven is unique among psychopomps. It doesn't just guide the dead, it guides consciousness itself through transformation. Every time you shed an old self, every time you let something die within you so something new can emerge, the raven is there, waiting to show you the way through. In Greece, Apollo, god of light, kept ravens as his sacred messengers, light served by darkness. The Greeks understood, these aren't enemies, they're partners. In Japan, the imperial family was guided by Yatagarasu, the 3-legged raven. 3 legs representing past, present, and future, all moving together, all necessary for the journey. And then there's Noah's flood. Noah sends out a raven first, before the dove. The raven flies out and never comes back. For centuries this was seen as failure, but look deeper, the raven chose its own path. It didn't return to the cage when called. Sometimes the psychopomp doesn't lead you back to safety. Sometimes it shows you that you were never meant to return to who you were. Why, across all these cultures, do we trust black-winged birds to carry souls? Because they're not afraid of death. They land on corpses and feed and fly away unchanged. They've seen what we refuse to look at, and they survived. The raven knows the way through because it lives there. In that space between breaths, where everything transforms. Ravens followed armies. They gathered where men fell. They fed on the aftermath of violence. This is biological fact. But watch what happens when humans see this pattern repeat. The pragmatic becomes prophetic. In Germanic tradition, Odin's ravens flew above every battlefield, selecting the honored dead destined for Valhalla. The raven's presence transformed slaughter into something sacred. Celtic warriors scanned the skies before combat. A raven's flight path could determine strategy. Its call could shift fate. What started as observation became divination. Here's the alchemical transformation. The necrophage became sacred. The creature that feeds on death became the guardian of life's continuation. Because without decomposition, nothing new grows. The raven doesn't just consume the dead, it completes the cycle. We're disgusted by what the raven does, yet we worship it for doing it. We need it to perform the task we can't stomach, then elevate it to divine messenger for having the stomach we lack. Apollo had a raven once, pure white, beautiful. It watched over his mortal lover, Coronis. When she betrayed him, the faithful raven flew immediately to report it. Apollo, in rage, killed her. Then, in grief, realized his mistake. But the deed was done. And the raven, Apollo turned it black, punishment for bringing news no one wanted to hear. This is the curse of the prophet, to see truth and be destroyed for speaking it. The raven went from white to black, not for lying, but for being the mirror that shows what we'd rather not see. In Celtic mythology, Bran the Blessed's severed head continued dispensing prophecy, guarded by ravens. Knowledge cut off from life itself, seeing everything, changing nothing. The pattern is terrifying. Those who see beyond the veil pay a price. Vision and madness are separated by the thinnest membrane. Modern science has caught up to ancient myth. Ravens possess theory of mind. They understand that other beings have thoughts and intentions. They recognize individual human faces years later. They solve problems requiring abstract thinking. They don't just mimic, they reflect. The ancients were right, the raven sees more than it should, and maybe that's why we've always feared it. But the raven isn't just death and prophecy. There's another face, wilder, more dangerous, the trickster. In Pacific Northwest traditions, raven is a god, but not the kind you pray to for protection. You can't trust him. You can't predict him. He acts from appetite, curiosity, and the sheer joy of disrupting order. When the sun was locked away, Raven didn't ask permission. He transformed himself, infiltrated, and stole what was never meant to be owned. He's not a traditional hero. He's hungry, he's clever, and he knows that a world kept in darkness is a dead world. Stasis is death. So he breaks the box, releases chaos, and from that chaos, life explodes. This makes people uncomfortable. We want our symbols neat. Death gods in the underworld, tricksters in comedies, wisdom figures solemn and serious. But Raven refuses categorization. He brings light through theft, creates through destruction, teaches through mockery. The trickster shows us what we need to understand. Transformation requires destruction. The egg must shatter for the bird to emerge. Without the raven, the world would calcify, trapped in its own order. The trickster cracks that prison open, and that mess, that chaos, that's where life actually happens. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the human psyche. At the center of that map, in territory most refused to enter, he found the shadow. Everything you've repressed, everything you've denied, every impulse you've judged too dark, too selfish, too violent, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates in the basement of your consciousness. The shadow isn't evil, it's unconscious, and that's what makes it dangerous. Jung understood what myths had been saying. The raven is the shadow made visible, everything we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. This is why we have such a strange relationship with it, drawn to it and repelled simultaneously. We admire its intelligence but fear its hunger. We're fascinated by its mythology but uncomfortable when we see one feeding on roadkill. The raven shows us what we are beneath the persona, that we too are creatures of appetite who feed on death to sustain life, who carry darkness that can never be eliminated, only integrated. Jung's insight: you don't destroy the shadow. Trying to kill it only makes it stronger. The only path forward is acceptance, integration. The raven doesn't ask you to become darkness. It asks you to stop pretending you're made only of light. The medieval alchemists' true work was internal. The chemicals were metaphors. The transformations they sought were about consciousness itself. At the beginning of the great work, before any transformation could occur, there was nigredo, the blackening, the descent into decay. The raven was the symbol. Black wings, black feathers, the absolute darkness that precedes dawn. Nigredo meant the death of the old self. Every illusion dissolved, every comfortable identity stripped away. Everything you built your sense of self upon had to rot, decompose, return to primordial darkness. It sounds like despair. It feels like despair. But the alchemists knew this is the crucible, where transformation becomes possible. Any attempt to jump from old self to new self without passing through nigredo results in delusion, not transformation. The raven presides over this dissolution. It watches as you fall apart. It feeds on what dies within you, and it waits for the moment when something new can begin to coalesce from the remains. In Eastern traditions, the raven is associated with Kala, time itself. Time that consumes everything but also allows for metamorphosis, because without time, nothing ever changes. The alchemical texts speak of the Sol Niger, the black sun, light so intense it appears dark. The raven sits at the center of this paradox, the darkness that illuminates, the death that reveals what's essential, the emptiness that makes space for what's coming. Nigredo isn't the end, it's the womb, and the raven is the midwife, even if that birth requires everything you currently are to die first. The archetype doesn't die, it adapts. It finds new forms, new stories. In 1845, Edgar Allan Poe crystallized the raven's place in Western Gothic imagination. A man drowning in grief is visited by a raven speaking only one word: nevermore. Every question, will I see her again? Will this pain end? Receives the same answer. The raven isn't trying to help. It's a mirror reflecting the truth the narrator refuses to accept. She's gone. Clinging to the past will destroy you. The Crow brought the archetype to film in 1994. A murdered man resurrected by a mystical crow to exact vengeance. The raven as psychopomp, guiding someone back from death rather than toward it. Sometimes healing requires destruction. In Game of Thrones, the three-eyed raven sees all of time simultaneously, but the cost is the loss of humanity itself. Bran becomes the raven and ceases to be Bran. Total vision requires total sacrifice. Neil Gaiman's Matthew serves dream itself in Sandman, a consciousness accepting its role as guide through the realm of stories and the unconscious. And in Teen Titans, Raven is a half-demon fighting her own shadow, literally battling her demonic father's influence. She is the Jungian drama made flesh, the eternal struggle to integrate darkness and light within a single being. From Victorian poetry to comic books to prestige television, the raven persists. The medium evolves, but the core remains. This is the creature that guides us through transformation, that witnesses our shadow, that forces us to confront what we've buried. The archetype doesn't age because the human struggle doesn't age. After all these myths, all these cultures, all these thousands of years, what is the raven actually telling us? From Japan to Scandinavia, from the Pacific Northwest to ancient Greece, the raven's role remains constant. It is the guardian of the threshold, the creature that stands between what was and what will be, ensuring you're ready to cross. It doesn't block the path to protect itself. It blocks the path to protect you. The raven tests you. Are you willing to face your shadow? Are you prepared to let the old self die? Can you survive the darkness without losing yourself completely? Here's where myth and reality merge. The actual intelligence of ravens mirrors their symbolic meaning. They demonstrate abstract thinking, plan for future contingencies, recognize patterns across time. They adapt, survive, and transform their approach based on changing circumstances, embodying the very transformation they symbolize. When the ancients called the raven a prophet, they recognized this pattern-seeing ability. When they called it a psychopomp, They acknowledged its comfort where death and life blur. When they called it a trickster, they honored its refusal to be controlled. The raven teaches us that consciousness itself must be adaptive, that wisdom requires holding paradoxes without forcing resolution. The raven doesn't promise safety or happiness. It promises transformation, if you're brave enough to follow. We've followed the raven through mythology, psychology, alchemy, and culture. But now, what does this mean for you? Right now, today, you have a shadow. Everyone does. Composed of everything you've disowned, everything you've been taught to be ashamed of, everything that doesn't fit the image you project. That shadow doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows. It becomes more primitive, more volatile. The raven's message isn't comfortable. You have to descend. You have to look at what you've been avoiding. You have to speak with the parts of yourself you've exiled. This is the catabasis, the descent into the underworld that every hero's journey requires. There is no transformation without it, but the raven also promises you can survive this. The descent isn't the end, it's the beginning. What feels like death is actually nigredo, the necessary dissolution before something new can emerge. The raven asks, what needs to die in you? What identity, what story, what comfortable lie needs to be released so something truer can take its place? These are terrifying questions, because answering them means real change, the deep kind. Where you let go of who you've been and step into the uncertainty of who you might become. The raven doesn't hold your hand. It simply flies ahead into the dark, calling back, this is the way, follow if you dare. Here's the final truth. The shadow isn't your enemy. It contains energy, vitality, creativity, power that you need. The very things you exiled are often what would make you whole. Integration isn't easy, but it's necessary. Every myth we've explored has shown you the same path. Accept the darkness not as something to overcome, but as something to include. Descend willingly. Let what needs to die, die, and trust that something will be born from those ashes. The raven has been humanity's guide through this process for thousands of years. It hasn't left. It won't leave. It simply waits for each of us to stop running and finally turn around. It began with a shadow in the sky, a black wing against the dying light, a call that stopped time. The raven never truly leaves. It's been here longer than cities, longer than civilizations, longer than the gods themselves. Because the raven isn't about any particular mythology. It's about the pattern beneath all mythology, the universal experience of transformation, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that consciousness must undergo to grow. The raven doesn't promise light or comfort. It doesn't promise the journey will be easy, but it promises this. You can survive the dark. You can pass through nigredo and emerge transformed. You can integrate your shadow and become whole. You can let the old self die and discover that what's born is stronger, truer, more alive than what came before. The raven is not the enemy of light. It never was. It is the guardian of the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. The question isn't whether the raven will call to you. It already has. The question is, are you finally ready to answer? What symbol calls to you from the shadows? What myth is asking to be understood? Let me know in the comments, and we'll follow it together into the depths. Until then, remember, the raven is waiting, patient as stone, and when you're ready, when you're truly ready, it will show you the way through the dark. The flight continues. It always has.